Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. So, my friends, I'm not sure how many of you are following this, and you don't have to be following this because it's not going to be the main topic of this video. In fact, it's going to be quite immaterial to the topic I'm talking about. But recently, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, the Libertarian Party branch of New Hampshire, rather, was subverted by the Libertarian National Party, and because of some inter-party drama that I really have no interest in following that much, that has been going on, and it has caused a lot of people to call into question their confidence in the leadership of the broader party. And when I was considering these situations, I thought to myself, Christian, infighting in political parties is not simply something that happens by accident. It doesn't happen simply because a party is disorganized. That can be a very big issue. Infighting in political parties happens because the structure of political parties themselves are actually fundamentally flawed. And this goes for the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as well. And so, as I was contemplating this in my secret place, I came to the conclusion that political parties are actually the greatest flaw, the greatest setback in the history of our republic, at least one of them, in the structure of our American republic, and that they tend to turn people who would otherwise be rational individuals or otherwise be motivated by, the pursuit of good values into propaganda mills for a certain set of interests. So what do I mean by this? So I want to walk you guys through both a historical explanation and a philosophical explanation of why I am very skeptical of political parties. We will do so by looking at three separate points. Number one, the cause. Everything has a first cause. The first principles of something is the best thing you can look at to understand not only its cause, but how it has developed and matured in life. Because something cannot develop and mature in life independent of it having the certain DNA of its cause. Apples come from trees for a reason, and that helps us understand the apple. Then we'll try to understand, after we understand its cause, the structure of political parties. And then I'll get into my 3 points as to why I think the structure of political parties actually is very, very dangerous for our republic, and why I'm skeptical. So, political parties in the American experiment are actually not legitimized or justified by the American Constitution. In fact, there is no mention of political parties in the American Constitution. Many of the founders were grievously skeptical of political parties, including George Washington. In fact, George Washington had the following to say about political parties. He said, "However, political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion." So according to Washington, political parties are self-defeating because they will actually destroy the very structure that they were enabled to occupy. Now, of course, principles are pure, people are not. Washington himself became kind of a puppet for the Federalists back in his day when he was president, which were headed by Alexander Hamilton, who pushed for the grievous and anti-liberty centralization and control of the American life back then, and who pushed against Thomas Jefferson's agrarianism and emphasis on state rights and decentralization. But that's a different story. So, of course, even though many of the founders were skeptical, a lot of them ended up getting roped into the poison of political parties. So while Washington's point was quite prescient, it's very obvious that these organizations spread very far and wide and even tied their most vocal opponents up into them. So, with all of that in mind, it is very important to understand the structure of these parties and to understand how the structure itself actually shows their flaws. So, in modern-day America, you have three levels of many political parties, particularly the Republicans and Democrats. You have the local level, which is basically they are the workhorses. They are the grassroots, on-the-ground help. They provide infrastructure to state and national efforts. They help get candidates elected locally. They focus on local issues. They are the people who are salt of the earth on the ground. Then you have the state party, who are also our workhorses, but actually they focus on the broader picture, on the state, on having a statewide platform, on drafting candidates, doing things which are beneficial to the propagation of certain values that party might hold. Then you have the National Party. Now, the National Party basically derives a lot of its energy, although not its impetus, but a lot of its energy from the state and local parties because they do all the work. But they are more so into the glitz, the glamour, they provide the aesthetic defense, the sort of aesthetic standard for that party's political tenor overall. They provide the conventions, they provide the media with more fodder, and they sort of perpetuate the system to make sure that the party has a certain image. So, for example, if there's a particular presidential candidate that they like or that they have nominated, the national party will make sure the state and local parties obviously fall into place. Now, there's also a legislative aspect to the structure of political parties. You have the President of the United States, and in whatever party he belongs to, the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, and then the party whips. And so all of this is going to come together in this analysis to really hone into as to why I think, again, political parties are structurally deficient and therefore dangerous to the republic. So, point one that I want to make to you guys is that political parties do not provide a safeguard against tyranny. In fact, the structure itself of political parties assist in making sure tyranny flourishes. What do I mean? So let's break this down etymologically, because if we want to use words, we should probably understand what they mean at their root cause so that no one is misinterpreting anything. So the word tyranny derives from the ancient Greek word tyrannia, which simply means absolute rule. So it then behooves a reasonable person in this paradigm that I've constructed to look how did the structure of political parties institute absolute rule. So let me give you a thought experiment first, and I'll go to a few historical examples. So imagine you have state and local parties, which are again not as influential as national parties, and oftentimes fall behind national parties, but still have influence in their own region. And you have in those parties the ability for people to be elected as officers, to create state platforms, to create certain principles within the legislative structure of those state and local parties. Now let's say you have Group A, and Group A has a certain set of values, which may be anathema to the American experiment, and you have Group B. Group B has a certain set of values that may either be anathema or neutral to the American experiment, or whatever. Anyway, you have these two groups with two very diverging interests, and both of them run to be elected to the state party offices or local party offices. What a lot of these people would do, they would get into local party offices and then shut out opposition to their ideas from anyone within the local party, then work their way up to taking power over the state party. And by taking power over the state party, that particular group can then implement their interest into the structure of the state party platform. And that can give them enormous power over who becomes governor, who becomes senator. And these are things that ultimately do have an effect on the national level. So what is the sort of through line between tyranny, absolute rule, and this? Parties are predicated upon majority rule, internally as well as externally. Externally, a party is concerned with occupying a state legislature or a congressional legislature, the Senate or the House, with as many of its members as possible. Internally, certain factions within the party are concerned with occupying a majority within the offices of the party so they can drive forth their agenda. Here's the point. Through the legislative mechanisms of both Congress, state legislatures, and the inter-party workings, majorities can come in, overtake, and impose their rule by force. And without any safeguards to prevent that, bad ideas can easily flourish. There is a reason as to why Hillary Clinton had to concede to the Democrats many of her centrist points to Bernie Sanders' socialist points when she ran for president after Bernie had dropped out. Not because she likes Bernie so much, because he doesn't, but simply because the Democrats were becoming a growing faction, the socialists, were becoming a growing faction, and they were overtaking the party in its processes, even though a lot of the establishment within the party does not like them. So when you have a structure that is quite literally predicated upon majority rule and is susceptible to political trickery and rhetorical manipulation, that is not a structure that protects against tyranny. That is a structure that allows tyranny, absolute rule, to occur. And of course, this leads me to my second point. Once that tyrannia has embedded itself into the structure of Congress, the structure of state legislatures, into the state houses, into the parties, those people within the party will be concerned about maintaining their power, not necessarily doing what is correct. And so, for example, the Federalist Party, back when the Federalist Party was in power, under Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, and George Washington, they passed the Alien and Sedition Act. Now, this was a long time before the advent of whips, which we'll get to in a moment. And the Alien and Sedition Act basically made it illegal to criticize many of the people that the Federalist Party favored. People were arrested for criticizing people like George Washington and others because they were seen as seditious. It was the greatest assault on free expression within the American experiment, period. And the Federalists were not concerned about the fledgling Constitution, which they were quite obviously violating, which is why Jefferson had to go into the state and say, okay, states, you have the power to override this, which also caused somewhat of a crisis in the structure of the government. What was morally correct was secondary to the Federalists' goals, but what was politically efficient was actually integral to their goals, or what they believed was politically efficient. We can come now towards the concept of a whip. A legislative whip is basically a party officer that goes in and makes sure that a particular legislator inside the party is doing what the party elites want that legislator to do. So once again, the emphasis is not on moral correctness. The emphasis is on whatever positions a party elder or a group of party elders may occupy. For a very, very long time in American history, over the past 10 years, in the 2010s, Republicans would always say we're going to balance the budget, we're going to cut taxes, and yet they would continue to raise the debt ceiling, and they would continue to aid and abet the fiscally frivolous and irresponsible actions of so many American presidents, or particularly of Barack Obama. Why? Because, again, they wanted to maintain power. These sort of sacred cows of entitlement programs, are also evidence of a political structure which is focused on maintaining power and not going towards principles. Entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, it is often said colloquially that if a politician were to raise his hand to swat any of them down, he would lose re-election because so many people are now invested in this form of legalized theft that, again, the political parties actively enable. They're not concerned with having a serious conversation about Medicare or Social Security. They're concerned about continuing to keep the idea of it being essential to our lives, keep the idea of government force being essential to our lives alive, because once again, they want to maintain power. Number 3. The third reason as to why political parties are perhaps some of the most structurally deficient things in our republic, and this goes into that, they don't care about truth. America was founded on axioms, and these axiomatic assumptions is what animated the spirits of people who were fighting in the Revolutionary War, and even many of the founders who were trying to hash out a constitution, and who burnt billions of kilowatts of incandescent brain energy, pouring their hearts and their souls and their passions into the formulation of the Constitution, some of whom actually left because they were not pleased with the final result, like Patrick Henry. They were concerned at finding truth. In a political discourse which has moved so far from first principles, you do not have an environment that is conducive to actually considering the principles that political decisions contain. We're not actually interested in considering if certain things are immoral, like overspending, like taxation, like imperialistic military action. We're concerned about doing, again, whatever our party elders tell us to do, whatever seems in step with people, whatever seems to be what the majority wants. And of course, this is another flaw. Parties are predicated upon the fickle whims of the majority. So when you have a party whose structure actually enables tyranny, then you have a political party whose structure in enabling tyranny seeks to preserve it at every cost. Then you have a structure, while enabling tyranny and seeking to preserve it at every cost, becomes unconcerned with the truth. What do you get? You get something that is not only alien to the American Constitution, as the founders mentioned, but is also fundamentally an anathema to the first principles of the American experiment, to the principles of natural law, natural rights, free inquiry, and things of that sort. In fact, as the great historian Richard Hofstadter, and I'm probably saying that very wrong, said, he said the founders did not believe, as modern Democrats do, that the partisan competition is an asset to the political order under what they call free government. All parties are simply deficient, principally and philosophically deficient structures of political order which give the appearance of representing compromise. And in principle, parties are fine because they are supposed to represent compromise and collaboration, which are necessary in the government. But in practice, they obviously go far beyond that. They're not interested in actually sticking towards principles. And compromise itself is something that I think is very dangerous, Because compromise does not involve, again, finding what the truth is and sticking to it. It involves doing whatever you can to maintain your hold on whatever little power you have. So it is for these reasons, my friends, that I refuse to join any political party, whether it's the Libertarian Party, the Democratic Party, Republican Party, and I will simply be a voice in the intellectual realm of ideas. Sparring and jousting with the bad ideas of the world, implementing seeds of growth, seeds of liberty into the social realm, and hopefully causing passions and causing the correct ideas to germinate in all of your hearts so you can take that into the political realm and do what you want with it. But parties themselves, my friends, are not worth your time, in my opinion. They are, again, structurally deficient. They are anterior to the purpose of the American government. And for that reason alone, they should be discounted in our political existence. Think on it. My friends, I love you. And if you love me, patreon.com/officialcwatson or PayPal, which is my email, officialcwatson@gmail.com, christianwatson.logos.com. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.